everyone, it's Megan Ramos here with my lovely co-host, Dr. Nadia Pataguana, for another one of our Q&A episodes where we answer your questions. Nadia, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Megan. How about you?
I'm just getting over food poisoning, and I'm on the mend, which is great, but of course, you're stuck on the couch or in bed and you Google things, just looking for other people's experiences with food poisoning, weird holistic remedies they might have tried. And it's so funny because whether it's a mainstream website or a holistic website, the universal message is just fast, which is exactly what I did. I did a 48-hour fast until I just started to feel so dehydrated that I was able to tolerate having some food at the end of 48 hours. But it's so funny because you'll hear mainstream medicine really give fasting so much grief. But when you look at conditions like food poisoning or other GI conditions like diverticulitis, for example, it's essentially fasting. They don't say it. They don't say fast for 48 hours or fast for 72 hours, but they say to avoid food, which is essentially the same thing. So anyways, I went down this food poisoning rabbit hole to sort of get the lay of the land for some holistic remedies just to help speed up my recovery. And I just thought it was so funny that fasting was the advice from everyone at the end of the day, even if they didn't come right out and say it. So, well, we all know that I'm good at fasting. So I think that's probably why I'm having a speedy recovery here.
Well, I'm definitely feeling a lot better than you, but having been there, and I agree that having the fasting muscle is very helpful when going through this. And I know for sure, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I know for sure that you are hydrating properly because that's really the most important thing when you got food poisoning and, are feeling the effects of it.
Yeah. So everyone, hydration is so critical. So I've had lots of lemon water and I've been putting in a pinch of the Himalayan salt with each glass of lemon water. And I've probably been having 12 to 16 glasses a day. No caffeine, but I have been having some ginger lemon tea. I loathe ginger, but it does make me feel so good.
Yeah.
I loathe peppermint tea also. I loathe all of the teas that are good for you pretty much, but I have them all, fortunately. And I do like dandelion root tea. So I've been having a lot of that, and all of them you can add in pinches of salt too and not really taste it. So that's kind of been my go-to. I have not been able to take broth. I think today I'm going to make soup, but just the literal thought of having broth has made my stomach even more queasy. So I've mixed in some pickle juice. There's this point where you just end up getting too dehydrated. So last night when my husband got home, it really didn't matter. No matter how much salt I had, even if I could muster up the effort to have some bone broth and actually keep it down, it wasn't going to happen. So I asked him to make me sort of this bland coconut flour pancake recipe from Diet Doctor. It's super great. It's got things like full fat coconut milk in it, just coconut flour, some eggs that cooked well, just really sort of simple, benign things. It ends up being more of a fiber bomb. And I had that with a few berries, and that sat really nicely. And, sometimes having a bit of carbs and gently raising your glucose and insulin levels can really help you retain water and sodium. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was a lifesaver. And I was just telling you that I actually fell asleep at 7:00 last night, and I slept for almost 12 hours. So feeling a lot better today, and that fiber definitely helped because I was in a rough hydration shape yesterday. So this is to the advice that we give everybody in our community, that you can fast, but there could be this point where you are experiencing so much water loss that it doesn't necessarily matter what you do in terms of hydration. I mean, you could be getting in all of the great sodium strategies and magnesium strategies in the world, but sometimes you do hit this point of no return. And you do need to have a meal just to help boost some water retention and some sodium retention. I used to run into issues with this in the clinic just due to poorer hydration strategies when clinic would get so busy. And I wasn't super diligent in a morning clinic. The afternoon clinic, I always hit that point of no return, and I'd have to cut my fast short. And then, of course, you feel well shortly after, you can jump into another fast. So I'm going to be doing at least a 24 today, and we'll see. I'm hoping to make some soup for dinner. The thought of bone broth today actually feels very nice. So I think that's a great sign that I'm healing. But everybody, you're always asking us. Nadia and I were just taking a look at our questions that you guys have sent in, and it's just so many about fasting when you feel unwell. And it's just so funny how for so many conditions, the remedy is to give the system a break, even though they don't necessarily come right out and say fast. But give the system a break, avoid food. And I definitely think having the ability to jump right into a 48-hour fast helped me a great, great deal.
Absolutely. And it's just a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about hydration, how important that is when you're fasting. Mm-hmm. And that really, at some point, right, if you're needing to rehydrate a little bit more because you either have diarrhea or food poisoning or whatever it is, food really is the best way to rehydrate in those circumstances. And then sleep, we all know or should know, good reminder of how important sleep is for healing. So I'm so glad you got that much sleep last night. That sounds like a dream.
Yeah, my Oura Ring. Oura Ring's one of those gadgets and gizmos. I don't know if you have one, but I'm someone who will spend all of my money on all of these things. And this one it's had a lot of longevity in my routine. I wear it every day. Eventually, my husband said, okay, I need to suck it up and get one, because he was always just so interested in my data. I'm actually on my third one. Not that they broke. I've had really good luck. I only got the third one because they released a new model, and I was interested in some of the particular features of the new model because I'm on a fertility journey myself, and their new features were very sort of along the lines of basal temperature tracking, a little bit more in depth, and some more in-depth heart rate tracking that I was very interested in for this phase of my life. And then I just switched previously for aesthetic reasons. I wanted to change the color of my ring since I was wearing it much more than I thought I would. So it's been a great little aid, and my sleep score was 95. So my body definitely needed that rest. Mind you, my readiness score was 51. So my body was fighting all night to sort of kill these bugs. But anyways, lessons, everybody, from my experience. Fasting can do you a whole lot of good, but there is a point of no return when it comes to hydration. So sometimes you do need to end your fast thoughtfully, but you got to do your best to stay hydrated. And you can really sneak salt in so many places, into water, lemon water, into different teas, even coffee. A lot of people add it to coffee to cut down on the bitterness. So random addition, which has nothing to do with today's Q&A episode, but random advice on fasting and food poisoning. Well, we'll get started. We've got 4 really great questions today that are on a variety of different fasting subjects. So we really appreciate these questions. And just so our listeners know, if you've got them, we want to hear them. Please email them into podcast@thefastingmethod.com, and we will try to get to them during one of these episodes. But the first question is, when you refer to lowering insulin levels, is that the same as lowering blood sugar levels? If it's not the same, how do we know our insulin level is lowering? Great question. So insulin's a bit of a funny molecule when it comes to doing testing, unlike glucose. So glucose or blood sugar, we know that we can go to the store and buy a glucometer. We can poke our fingers, put a little teeny bit of a blood on this little strip of paper, and the glucometer will give us a reading. Or many people who do have access to something called a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, will wear it on their abdomen or on their tricep, and pretty much getting a 24/7 reading of their glucose levels. So they are able to see how stressful moments impact glucose, how poor night's sleep impacts it, how different foods or different combinations of foods interfere with their glucose levels. Really easy molecule to work with, glucose is, when it comes to measuring. But insulin is finicky. There are really no equivalent tests at home that you can do today to get easy access to insulin levels. Of course, you can get your doctor to write you a lab request to do a fasting insulin test at a laboratory. So if you're in the US, something like Quest or LabCorp, or in Canada, Dynacare or Life Labs. So most major labs will do insulin tests. And there are some at-home methods. One of them is So Well, or you can go to their website at Get So Well. And they have these little metabolic kits where you do blood samples at home and mail them in. And they do measure insulin in the majority of their kits, I believe. But there's nothing that you can do to measure insulin at home like you can measure glucose. Now, I will say that there are a lot of people working on this, and there have been for many, many years now. And I've heard through the grapevine that they are getting pretty close, but insulin's just not the most stable molecule to work with. So we can't get that real-time data. Like, you can't eat something, poke your finger, get a little blood draw, and see what your insulin level is, unfortunately. Now, in general, if your glucose levels go up, your insulin levels are going to go up. So you can look at your glucose levels as a bit of an indicator into whether or not you're experiencing increased levels of insulin. So, if you were to just eat like a baked potato on its own and you see your glucose level shoot up to like 190 or 240, you should expect that your insulin level is also going to spike up. Very similar response from a baseline level. But there are certain set of circumstances where insulin levels are elevated in the absence of seeing glucose elevated. Now, insulin is produced regardless of anything that we eat. It's just produced a heck of a lot more when we eat carbohydrates. But there is a bit of insulin response for protein and fat. It's almost negligible in the case of fat. So it's just like you don't see your insulin levels, or your glucose levels rather, go up when you have a more protein or fatty meal, like a ketogenic meal. You would expect your insulin levels really don't go up. But in the case of sweeteners, particularly natural sweeteners, which so many people in our community consume. So they think that they're doing a great job, kicking the aspartame or the Splenda to the curb and substituting with stevia, for example, or sugar alcohols like xylitol, erythritol, and then there's different combinations of stevia and xylitol and erythritol that make up different types of brands of sweeteners. And people will ask, I don't really understand. When I have these things, my glucose levels don't go up, but I become really hungry and the weight's just not coming off. And I don't really understand why. Like, I see these people and they're like running on a hamster wheel. They're never making any progress. And when Jason and I first started the clinic, back when we had the clinic in Toronto, we were learning every day. So we told people, yeah, sure, have stevia when you're fasting. And the ones who did, they struggled, and they struggled with cravings. I mean, that's from the sweetness of the stevia, but they struggled. And as soon as they cut it out, they saw big improvements. And we would check some of these patients in the clinic. And while they weren't having a glucose response, when we measured their before and after insulin response at the lab, we would see a significant rise in their insulin levels. And then Jason's found some pretty interesting data to support this. So while certain sweeteners might not have a glucose response, we do see them having an insulin response. Nadia, do you have anything to add to my ramble there?
No, I think that that's perfect. It's important to recognize that insulin is a hormone that we produce in response to foods, all foods, some foods more significantly than others. Whereas, our blood sugar levels rise in response to, of course, again, foods, and then that triggers that hormonal response, that insulin response. I think it's important to recognize that even though we cannot yet measure our insulin levels at home, once we start to understand this a bit more over time, we will start to recognize these symptoms. Like you said, if you're really hungry after you eat, it's because you've, increased your insulin more. And you also begin to separate the two, blood sugar and insulin, in that some things don't raise your blood sugars all that much. So if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic and you have access to a CGM or just are checking with your glucometer and you're like, oh, this is a quote unquote safe food for me because my blood sugars don't go up that high, they may in fact raise your insulin. And one trick I have found through learning from our diabetics is that even though it doesn't have an immediate blood sugar response, so you don't see that post-meal increase, your morning blood sugars the next day will be higher if you have something that creates more of an insulin response. Like people will often say this about having sweeteners in the evening or having dairy, for example. It didn't cause an immediate blood sugar response, but the next morning those blood sugars are a lot higher. And so those are the big differences between, even though they're, we often talk about them together, insulin and blood sugars. They're not the same and not the same. The foods that will cause one to rise may not cause the other one to rise. So yeah, when we were talking about lowering insulin, that was the initial question. We're not necessarily talking about lowering blood sugars. When we're talking about fasting, of course, a side effect of fasting, a good side effect, is losing weight, lowering blood sugars. But what we're actively trying to do through making better food choices and through fasting is to lower insulin and reverse insulin resistance and the expressions of metabolic syndrome. So not the same, but related somehow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nadia. We've got a question for you. And we spend so much time talking about fasting and female sex hormones, whether that's fasting around a woman's cycle, fasting postmenopausal. But fasting has a lot of great benefits on men's health. And this is where I think you are just such the expert on our team on overall hormonal health. So the next question is, do you know if intermittent fasting plays a role in improving endothelial function, more specifically, helping with erectile dysfunction?
What a great question. I'm so happy that you sent this over to me because you know how much I love talking about reproductive health, sexual health in both men and women. It isn't often talked about, like you said, but it is a big topic and it is an important topic and a topic that men are obviously very interested in. We do talk a ton about menopause and reproductive health and fertility because women are more, open and will actively ask it openly. Men do talk a lot and, of course, are very interested in their sexual health. And they will in clinic. I know that we've talked about this, Megan, you and I. Men will and have spoken to us in clinic about this all the time. Here's the thing. There's probably not a lot of research, scientific research, and a lot of talk about this because there just isn't a ton on fasting because of, funding and whatnot. But there is a ton of clinical and anecdotal evidence that fasting and low carb and real food diet has a major impact on both men and women's sexual health and libido, even for women. So that there's another topic we don't talk a lot about because women are often talking about other things, but there is a ton of clinical and anecdotal evidence from not just our community, but if you look at other experts in the low carb field, especially, I can name quite a few that talk a ton about this. So if you want more information for both men and women, just look up any of these more prominent figures in the low carb keto world and what they have to say about sexual health, libido, erectile dysfunction. What we have seen, of course, is that specifically erectile dysfunction in men is one of the very common complaints in men with insulin resistance and diabetes. Of course, they come in and they may or may not mention it. We sort of know because of our experience. In our community right now, we're lucky to have Coach John, who's so active in the male community and answering these types of questions. And we have groups and Q&As. And so Megan and I have, of course, this added advantage of having been in clinic for so many years. So we know that whether men came in and wrote down, and this is often in intake forms, right, for men when they have metabolic syndrome. So we know that it is in fact something. And there is a lot of, you can look this up in a more academic type of research and papers, that erectile dysfunction is one of the very common expressions of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. So then our luck, Megan and I, is that we got to work with these men They were not coming in for this specifically. They were coming in for diabetes and other insulin resistant expressions like obesity. And then we, of course, somehow down the line, whether we ask or they will volunteer the information, or again, we give them another intake form, and then they check the box that this is one of the things that improved. Within the community, again, it's not something that I find men are as comfortable talking about as women are about their sexual health. But from a clinician's perspective, this is definitely something that I can say that if you understand and work towards lowering insulin resistance and reversing diabetes and obesity, one of the positive side effects is improved sexual function, improved libido in both men and women. Anything else, Megan?
No, I just can't echo what you're saying enough about improving insulin, and both for women and men in terms of sexual function. Jason and I, our clinic was pretty much split 50-50 men and women, with most individuals being over the age of 50 years old. And so many men, they'd hang around after their small group sessions and they'd say, hey, this is better for me. I've been struggling with erectile dysfunction for the last few years or last several years. And I've noticed that as I've lost weight, as my waist size has come down, as my blood sugars have improved and all of my lab tests, keep getting better, that, I'm feeling a little bit more confident and less reliant on taking some medication to assist me when I'm being intimate with my spouse. And it's just so great to see all of the far-reaching benefits of lowering insulin levels. And again, so many women out there just think men get these benefits. Men don't necessarily always realize that lowering insulin can give them these benefits. But it really, getting control of that insulin can just help your overall hormonal profile. So men experience these great improvements in sexual function, sexual health, and so do women. Women would come into the clinic all of the time, and they're experiencing arousal in the way that they did in their 20s, and that they haven't, since they started to enter menopause or in their postmenopausal years. And that just really goes to show that insulin, when it's elevated at these toxic levels, can really wreak havoc on all of our body systems.
Yeah, that's so true. And even though, again, to sort of reiterate that, even though I think men may not always be comfortable talking about this in groups or in a community, they are pretty comfortable talking about it when it's one-on-one with their doctor, with their clinician, with their nurse, whether they're male or female. This is something that I experienced, even though I started working as a clinician in my mid-20s, and you even earlier, Megan. This is something that men would often talk about because this was a complaint that they had, and it was a good, surprising sort of benefit that men would, and they were comfortable, again, to share this with their clinician. So from a clinician setting, we definitely see this.
All right. The next question is about fasting while exercising. I was just wondering what your thoughts on working out during a fast. I have read other sources stating that working out after hour 16, when burning fat is wrapping up, would help to burn more fat. This is a really great question. And my advice, of course, is not a one-size-fits-all piece of advice here. If you are very brand new to fasting, and if you're trying to tackle a lot of metabolic health issues, you can feel very motivated to try to do 100 things at once. So that usually fails. It's best to start off with one intervention and then start to incorporate other various interventions slowly. So when someone has a ton of insulin resistance and they first start fasting, they are going to see a dramatic drop in their internal insulin levels. And insulin forces the body to retain water. And when our insulin starts to go down, a signal is sent to our kidneys saying, okay, the insulin's down. So all that insulin that's gone, we got to get rid of the water that it was retaining. And through that water loss, we can become deficient in various electrolytes. To go back to our previous conversation about food poisoning, it is really important to make sure that you are hydrating properly, but sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. Like yesterday, it did not matter what I did. I was doing everything right, and I still was past the point of dehydration, being manageable in a fasted state and needed to have a meal. So During this initial 2 to 4 weeks, when you're fasting and you're seeing these huge drops in your insulin and you are losing a ton of water, I would recommend doing crazy intensive exercise during this time. That's not to say that you should be a couch potato. Actually, being very sedentary when you fast can make you feel worse. You do want to be active. So during your first 2 to 4 weeks of fasting, if you are someone with a lot of insulin resistance at the start, just to help mitigate the potential side effects. A lot of people experience flu-like symptoms because of this when they first start fasting, this water loss and electrolyte loss. It's best to stick to walking, even more casual, leisurely hikes. I wouldn't go too crazy on hikes that are more like HIIT training, but casual hikes out in nature, Pilates, yoga. I think focusing on mobility work, those types of things are really great on a fasting day to help keep you feeling well and to help your body adapt to fasting. With that being said, once you see that huge dramatic drop in your insulin and things start to normalize and you get a good handle on your fasting and your eating days and you've learned how to hydrate properly, exercising in a fasted state can definitely enhance your results. And I've done weight training with the exception of 2021, just because pandemic was nuts and I moved from Canada to California and there's a lot of transitions happening. So I put that on pause that year, but I've been doing weight training since like 2017. And I've had my best training session when I was 94 hours fasted. So much so that the trainers, who were always so scared that I was going to start talking about fasting to other clients, they were so impressed with my weight training session that they asked me to come in and talk to them, educate them on fasting, because they just couldn't believe I wasn't keeling over and dying in my session. So when you've gotten past, that initial induction period with fasting, it can definitely help boost your fat loss. Absolutely. There's tons of great benefits. There's certain people like Benedict Cumberbatch or Hugh Jackman that will strategically fast around the 19 to 21 hour mark of a fast because there's a big boost in human growth hormone around that time. And then they'll break their fast after their workout once they've had all this human growth hormone be produced. They've worked their muscles, so their muscles are going to be immediately trying to repair. So they'll break their fast, get some protein, get a bit of insulin. They'll have that human growth hormone. And that really helps jack them up for their movie roles. So this is a very common practice to sort of fast around these particular spikes in human growth hormone and really sort of get those muscles going in repair mode and growth mode when they break their fast. So there are different strategies people use, but in general, exercising while in a fasted state can help you burn more body fat. It's another great strategy to use too, to also feel better. Sometimes when I'm feeling a little sluggish during my fast, I'll exercise. And by doing so, I'm boosting my glucose levels a bit and I'm lowering my ketone levels a bit. So as people are becoming more metabolically flexible, they might not be using our fuel sources very efficiently. And so your body might be producing ketone bodies for fuel, which are an alternative fuel source to glucose, but your body is really not using them very efficiently. And then you don't have enough glucose. So you start to feel a little bit sluggish. So exercising will definitely force the body to use those ketone levels and help you feel better and develop or improve metabolic flexibility. So it's always been such a great tool on my fasting days to help me become healthier. So after that first month of fasting and you got your diet under control, you've got a good consistent fasting rhythm going, you understand the tools for a hydration during a fast. Then when it comes to exercise, there is a bit of a different hydration strategy. So 60 to 90 minutes before you work out, you need to have a good amount of water. I'm talking like a liter 32 ounces of water. You need to have a really good amount of water, and you need to have a really good amount of salt. So I would typically work out on a Thursday, but just since I'm recovering, I'm going to pass today. But what I would usually do is my workouts at 3:30. So around 2 o'clock, I would go get my water bottle, and I would add about a half a teaspoon of salt to a liter of water, 32 ounces of water. And I would typically try to sip that over a 30-minute period or so. And that gives my body about an hour to actually hydrate. So many people think if I drink water with a pinch of salt, I'm instantly going to be hydrated. That's not the case. Like it's got to work its way through your digestive system. It's got to be absorbed. It needs to go to the muscles in the right places to hydrate them. It's a process, and it takes about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour for that to actually happen. So on workout days, there's this very intentional pre-exercise, pre-fitness hydration that I do. And it's really important to get that water in with that salt. So you need the water to help retain the salt. You need the water to help feel good when you're taking that much salt at once. So I really recommend everybody check out Dr. James DiNicolantonio's books. He has one called The Salt Fix, and then a new one called Win. Sorry, I'm just looking over my shoulder. Well, you guys can't see that. Nadia can. I just got it in a few weeks ago, and really interesting stuff on hydrating around exercise. So I think it's probably the best resource out there. Now, immediately after exercise, like you're going to perspire, you're going to sweat out most of the electrolytes you did consume. So I will always bring some salty water with me to have and to sip on after I work out. Or when I was newer to fasting, I would actually bring bone broth with me to have after the gym. So many people are saying, I'm always ravenous after a workout. I'm like, you're not ravenous. Your sodium levels are low. You became depleted because you sweated so much. And when our levels of electrolytes get really low, our hunger signals go up, because that's, a really surefire way to boost our electrolytes is to get in some food, but you can mitigate it. So honestly, like my first 6 months of fasting, when I started to incorporate exercise, bone broth was kind of my savior at the end of the workout till I figured it out. And I was really navigating my nutrition for all of that 6 months. It was certainly been a work in progress for me. But nowadays, just some salty water helps, or some pickle juice is nice. I'll add some pickle juice to a water bottle that I would drink on my way home from the gym. And that's a really nice way to mix it up on a hot summer's day. Nadia, any additional thoughts on exercising while fasted?
No, but I'm so glad that not only did you talk about the benefits of exercising in a fasted state, the fact that there is some really great information out there from people that are doing it. Again, you're not going to get a whole lot of research papers on this, because who's going to sponsor, you're going to get a lot more research papers on what kind of shakes and whatnot you should have after exercise, because there's some money behind that. But fasting, it's hard to get funding for researching, but you do get a lot of, actually, within the field of professional athletes and bodybuilders, you do get a lot of people talking about this. So if you guys are interested, look that up. I know that you, Megan and Jason, have worked with some professional athletes who are very interested in fasting, not just for performance, athletic performance, but for, I remember this, ulcerative colitis, serious inflammatory condition of the bowel. So anyway, some really good information out there if you guys do a bit of research from the experts, right? The athletes themselves. And then a few years ago, do you remember this? When Jason and you started writing about exercise and fasting, there was this old dude, super cute old dude who was a bodybuilder many, many moons ago. And he wrote to you guys and he was saying, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I knew about this in the 70s and I was doing this when everybody else was pumping steroids. I was fasting, and it's just some amazing stuff. But I'm extra glad that you talked about the extra needed electrolytes when you are exercising and how to take it, right? Because sometimes you're taking electrolytes, but you're not taking it enough or appropriately, and it's just going right through you. And so you're not absorbing it, or you're not taking it early enough. So that's really important, because you will feel pretty crummy if you exercise and you're dehydrated.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an underlying theme, I guess, of today's Q&A episode that we hadn't planned upon, but that's exactly why. I'm just recovering from dehydration. So I'm going to take my dog on an extra long walk. I've got one dog on bed rest for a paw injury, but the one who can go, I'll go on a nice walk for her, but I'm not going to be pumping any iron today. So it's really important to be mindful and to adjust your workouts depending on how you're feeling as well. All right, Nadia, another question that's about peri-menopause. Does it take a while to see results if you're peri-menopausal? And in this instance, would it be more effective to do 342s than 336-hour fasts a week?
What a great question. And as you know, Megan, we've now implemented into our community program. I'm running a weekly Q&A, question and answer session on every Monday on specific women and fasting topics. So sometimes I talk about PCOS, other times I talk about menopause and peri-menopause, other times I talk about fasting with your menstrual cycle or fertility, women in weight loss. I mean, it's a hot topic for sure. So every week we have a Q&A on this. And this week, this Monday, this question actually came up or something similar, right? This idea of fasting during perimenopause or postmenopause. And there's always this underlying thought and feeling that women have that perimenopause and menopause is this doom and gloom. It's just like, you know, you're something is wrong with you and you're broken. This week I felt the need to remind women that there's nothing wrong with perimenopause, nothing wrong with menopause. It's just a phase of our lives, and it is a natural phase of our lives, right? So the idea that, you know, we've had women, postmenopausal women, have more success than 20-year-old women or 30-year-old men. And the reason for that is because I think that they got to a point where they understood their hormones, and that even when we're talking about fasting, we're talking about how much can we control our hormones, and it's kind of like the serenity prayer, right? I talk about this in my groups all the time, you know, knowing the things that we can control and the ones that we can't, and having the wisdom to know the difference. You cannot control menopause, people, and there's nothing wrong with menopause or perimenopause. I am officially announcing that I'm entering perimenopause, which makes sense. I'm at the right age for it, and I can tell. My hormones have changed, my periods have changed, and they're still regular, luckily, because of fasting and low carb. Even though I had PCOS and crazy periods, very irregular, they're now very regular, but they're getting shorter and shorter. And there's other changes. I've also had some hormonal tests, reproductive hormone testing done. And so I'm in that period of perimenopause, which is a period that clearly this person is in, and we work with women in this period of time. What happens during perimenopause and postmenopause? Your hormones change, right? Your hormone levels change. We cannot control that unless you go and take bioidentical or other forms of hormone replacement therapy. We are not trying to change your estrogen and your progesterone levels unless you are doing that with your doctor. What we're trying to impact is your insulin and your insulin resistance. What does happen during perimenopause and postmenopause is, of course, both estrogen and progesterone levels start to drop. What this shows us is that pre-menopause, we actually had an advantage that we didn't even realize, right? Women do have this, they're hormonally blessed and do have an advantage over men. Women don't realize this, but they start to realize it when they hit perimenopause and menopause. But now you're not in a worse place than men are, right? You're just in a lower estrogen and progesterone phase than you were in a few years ago. And this has an impact on your insulin levels. Yes, it does. Because when you are cyclical, when you still have a period, there's a part of your cycle where you're more insulin resistant, and there's a part of your cycle that you're less insulin resistant. So there's a part of your cycle where you can lose weight more easily, and there's a part of your cycle where you tend to retain more easily. And so if we understand this, then we can even create some fasting protocols around this so that you can have an even more added advantage as a woman and take advantage of your fasting and your eating to lower that insulin further and to lose more weight or reverse diabetes or fix your PCOS. But you can still do this during that transition period, those few years of perimenopause and postmenopause, in a more less cyclical manner, sometimes more linear manner, more similar to men. So again, you're in a different place than you were a few years ago, but you're not in a worse place when you compare yourself to other people. It's compared to yourself. So of these two fasting protocols, which one would be best for somebody in perimenopause? Well, I think they're both great fasting protocols, but let's define the difference between the two. At 3 times 42 hour means that you are alternating 2 meal days, so days where you're eating 2 meals, and then fasting for a whole day after that. That's the alternate day, 2 meal, no meal, also known as the 42-hour alternate day protocol. And the reason for that is because people that are doing 2 meals, and these 2 meals are usually 6 to 8 hours apart, they're then fasting 42 hours around that until the next day where they're doing 2 meals. The 36-hour protocol is usually one followed by people that are doing 3 meals a day. So they're doing 3 meals a day in a slightly longer period, right? And then they're fasting for 36 hours, so a full overnight fast until the next eating day, which is again 3 meals. So that's the big difference. What you're asking yourself, young lady in perimenopause here, is whether you should be doing 2 meals a day on your eating days or 3 meals a day. And I think that that's going to depend on where you are. If you're starting out, perfectly fine and great, in fact, to go from eating 10 million times a day and snacking and grazing to eating 3 rich, satiating, nourishing meals with a nice gap between them, creating that intermittent fasting or TRE, time restricted eating type of protocol. But if you've already done that and you're comfortable moving to 2 meals a day, then yes, you do have that added time between meals to drop insulin and that longer fast between eating days to lower insulin. And so as you're lowering this insulin, you're becoming less and less insulin resistant. There's an advantage to that whether you are cyclical, so a menstruating woman, whether you are perimenopausal, or whether you are postmenopausal. I think it's just a different stage. So you just have to address where you're at. If you're comfortable doing 342s, then that is the quote unquote gold standard for weight loss for people in general, men, women, postmenopause, perimenopause, premenopause. Then your second question, does it take a while to see results in perimenopausal women? It can take a while for people to see results if they're very, very insulin resistant, right? And our job here and everything that we're talking about is helping you to lower your insulin levels through fasting and better food choices. And so it can take a while. And again, it's not because of menopause or perimenopause. It's because of your insulin resistance. And there is a reason why you yourself might be a slightly more insulin resistant now that you are in perimenopause versus before, when you had more estrogen, so you were less insulin resistant. So yes, you might be slightly more insulin resistant now, but if that's the problem, then the solution is still to lower insulin. And we know how to do that. The 342s is a great protocol. You can even throw in one longer fast a month if you're comfortable with that to lower that further. What happens to people sometimes is that, and Megan has talked about this a lot when she talks about women in fasting in the series that she wrote about in our master classes and whatnot, is that sometimes you have to lower that insulin below a certain threshold to start seeing results. So you kind of have to trust the process. And many, many women have experienced this and have talked about this. There are many other NSVs, non-scale victories, that you can look at in the meantime. So you're like, yeah, I can see that my insulin is going down. And eventually you start to lose weight. So weight is not the end all be all when it comes to lowering insulin. Eventually it is a side effect of lowering insulin. So eventually, once your insulin goes down past a certain threshold, you do go into that fat burning state and you will start to see the weight drop. But you need to keep your eye on the ball, as I often joke as a coach. I used to say this all the time. You got to lower those insulin levels, regardless of whether you're premenopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal. There is a relationship between insulin and these reproductive hormones, and I talk about these in my groups and my Q&As every single week.
Thanks, Nadia. And thanks to everybody who wrote in their questions today. Again, you can email your questions into podcast@thefastingmethod.com. There's some exciting new master classes coming up as well. So head over to our website, thefastingmethod.com/programs/masterclass, or just go to thefastingmethod.com and you'll be able to find the masterclass page. Nadia's got some exciting stuff coming out, as do I. provide to help women and men get ready to be in their best health going into the summertime. All right, everyone, we will see you back here on another episode of the Fasting Method. And please make sure, if you like this podcast, to subscribe to it and leave us a review. Let us know what you like, what you want to see more of. Let us know how it's going for you. All right, everyone, we'll see you soon. And Nadia, we'll get back to another episode in just another week.
Bye, everyone. Feel better, Megan.
Thank you.